Stop scrolling for a second. I need you to hear this. It's 3 a.m. A billionaire worth $3 billion is walking the dark, silent hallways of his 60-room mansion, and he hears something. Tiny voice. Trembling. Broken. Coming from the servants' quarters at the end of the hall. He follows it, and what he finds stops him completely. A 3-year-old little girl, sitting alone on the cold kitchen floor in the dark, with one small birthday candle burning in front of her. No cake, no family, no one, just her, and that one tiny flame. And then, she makes a wish. And when billionaire Alex Hales hears those 4 whispered words come out of that baby's mouth, his entire world, his money, his empire, his carefully built walls, all of it cracks. Stay with me. You need to hear this whole story. Hey beautiful people. Welcome back to this channel, where every story we tell is about the kind of love that changes lives forever. I'm so glad you're here today. Before we begin, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from? I genuinely love reading every single one of your replies. And if you're new here, no pressure, but if stories like this one move your heart, you might just want to hit that subscribe button. We tell these kinds of stories every single week. Alright, let's go. Take a deep breath, because this one is going to stay with you. Some houses are built with money, but not all of them are built with love. The Hales estate sat on 40 acres of prime land on the outskirts of the city, a monument of marble, glass, and cold perfection. 60 rooms, 12 bathrooms, a heated pool, a private cinema, a wine cellar that cost more than most people's homes, security cameras at every corner, a gate that required a fingerprint, a code, and a face scan just to open. From the outside it looked like a dream. From the inside, it felt like a very beautiful prison. Alexander Hales, Alex, to the very few people who were allowed to call him anything at all, had built this empire with his own 2 hands. 30 years old, sharp-jawed, dark-eyed, with a kind of presence that made entire boardrooms go quiet the moment he walked in. He had started with nothing, a small apartment, a second-hand laptop, and an idea that most people had laughed at. Nobody was laughing now. His tech company, Hales Global, had a market cap of $3 billion. Magazines called him a visionary. Business schools used his story as a case study. Young entrepreneurs taped his photo to their walls. But behind closed doors, Alex Hales ate dinner alone every night. He hadn't celebrated a birthday in 6 years. He didn't own a single photograph of himself smiling. He had a rule in his house, a silent, unspoken rule that everyone on his staff understood without being told. Don't get personal. Don't ask questions. Do your job. Stay invisible. His household staff changed frequently. Most of them couldn't handle the silence, the coldness, the way he would walk right past them in the hallway without so much as a nod. But 3 months ago, a new housekeeper had arrived. Her name was Priya. She was 26 years old, quiet-spoken and careful, the kind of woman who moved through a room without disturbing it. She had warm brown eyes that held a kind of tiredness in them that went much deeper than just lack of sleep. She kept to herself. She did her work well. She never asked for anything. And she had a daughter, a 3-year-old little girl named Mina. Now, it was extremely unusual. Actually, it was completely against Alex's standard hiring policy to allow a staff member to bring a child onto the premises. But the staffing agency had sent Priya because she was exceptional, and the note attached to her file had said simply, "Single mother. No alternative childcare. Child is quiet and will not be a disturbance." Alex had stared at that note for a long time. Then he had signed the approval form without explanation and never spoken of it again. Mina lived with her mother in the small staff suite at the back of the mansion, 2 rooms, a tiny bathroom, a window that looked out over the garden. It was modest compared to the rest of the house, but to Priya, it was safe. It was warm. It was more than she'd had in a very long time. Meena was something else entirely. She was small for her age, with her mother's large dark eyes and a head full of wild curls that never stayed in their clips. She carried a battered stuffed elephant everywhere she went. She called him Motu, and she whispered to him constantly like he was her most trusted advisor. She was not loud. She was not disruptive. But she was present in a way that was impossible to ignore. If you left a door open, Meena would peer through it with those enormous eyes, curious and completely unafraid. If you dropped something, she would toddle over and pick it up and hand it back to you with a very serious expression, like she was completing an important mission. If you looked sad, she would just stand near you, not saying anything, just being there. The staff adored her. Alex Hales had never once looked at her directly. He was aware she existed, the way you're aware of background noise. Registered, filed, and deliberately ignored. Priya made sure of that. She was careful to keep Meena in their rooms during Alex's working hours, during his meals, during his morning walks. She had built her entire daily routine around avoiding him. Because Priya understood something that Meena was too young to understand yet. Some people's coldness isn't cruelty. It's armor. And the worst thing you can do to armor is make it feel something. Have you ever worked somewhere or lived somewhere where you felt completely invisible? Where you did everything right and still felt like you didn't matter? Take a second and remember that feeling. Because Priya felt it every single day. What Priya didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that in exactly 3 days, everything in that mansion was going to change. Because of one birthday, one candle, and 4 words whispered in the dark by a 3-year-old girl who didn't know that the most powerful man in her world was standing just outside the door, listening. What breaks a mother's heart isn't always a catastrophe. Sometimes it's a calendar. It was the morning of March 14th, Meena's birthday. Priya had known this day was coming for weeks, and for weeks she had been quietly, carefully saving. Not much. She couldn't save much on a housekeeper's salary, especially after sending money back to her own mother in their hometown, after paying the small fee for Meena's daycare 3 mornings a week, after buying the children's vitamins the doctor had recommended. But she had saved enough for a small cake. A real one, from the bakery 2 streets away from the estate's service entrance. Chocolate, because Meena had once pointed at a picture of a chocolate cake in a magazine and said, "Mama, that one," with such conviction that Priya had laughed for 10 minutes. She had saved enough for 3 balloons. Pink, because that was Meena's current favorite color. Priya wasn't sure why. It had simply become Meena's answer to everything. What color should we paint the wall? Pink. What flavor ice cream? Pink flavor. What do you want to be when you grow up? A pink one. She had saved enough for a single small gift. A set of 4 chunky crayons and a coloring book featuring elephants, which Meena would love because of Motu. It wasn't much. But Priya had planned it down to the minute. She would finish her morning shift, the deep clean of the east wing that Alex had requested. She would collect Meena from daycare at noon. She would set up their tiny room with the balloons and the cake. She would light the 1 birthday candle she'd bought, and she would sing. Just the 2 of them. Just like every year. It was their tradition. Except at 7 a.m., Priya's phone rang. The daycare. There had been a small incident. Nothing serious. But one of the other children had a contagious virus, and the facility had to close for the day as a precaution. Could she collect Meena by 8? Priya's carefully constructed plan shifted. Fine, she would collect Meena first, settle her in their room with Motu and the coloring book, then finish the east wing cleaning quickly. At 8:15 a.m., Alex Hales called an emergency household meeting. Apparently, a business delegation from Singapore was arriving that evening. Unscheduled, the way Alex's life always seemed to operate, and the entire West Wing needed to be guest-ready by 5 p.m. All hands. No exceptions. Priya looked at Meena sitting on their little bed, hugging Motu, completely unaware. "Okay," Priya said into her phone. "I'll be right there." She set Meena up with her crayons and her coloring book. She put a little container of cut fruit on the table beside her. She kissed her forehead, once, twice, a third time, the way she always did. "Mama will be back soon, baby. You color your elephants, okay?" Meena looked up at her with those serious eyes. "Is it still my birthday?" Priya's throat tightened. "Yes, my love. It is absolutely still your birthday. Are we still doing cake?" "We are absolutely still doing cake. With the candle." "With the candle." Meena considered this with great gravity, then nodded and went back to her coloring. "Okay, Mama." The cleaning of the West Wing took until nearly 9 p.m. The Singapore delegation arrived with extra staff, extra luggage, extra demands. The kitchen needed a full resurface. 2 of the guest bathrooms needed to be restocked. The formal dining room needed its silver polished by hand. By the time Priya finally walked back toward the staff quarters, her feet were aching, her shoulders were burning, and her heart was dragging somewhere around her knees. She had missed it. She had missed Meena's birthday. She pushed open the door to their room, and her stomach dropped. Meena was asleep on the bed, fully dressed, still holding Motu. The crayons were scattered. The coloring book was open to a page of elephants, only half colored in. The little container of fruit was empty. On the small table, Priya had placed the cake that morning before leaving. She'd managed to sneak out and collect it from the bakery at least. The cake was still there. The single birthday candle stood unlit in the center. Meena had waited. She had waited all day for her mama to come light the candle, and at some point, sleep had simply overtaken her. Priya stood in the doorway and pressed her hand over her mouth. She would not cry. She refused to cry. She crossed the room quietly. She pulled the blanket up over Meena's small sleeping body. She smoothed those wild curls away from her forehead. And then she went to the bathroom, turned on the tap so the sound would cover her, and she let herself break. Just for a minute. Just for 60 seconds of silent, crumbling grief. For every year she had tried so hard. For every sacrifice that was never enough. For every birthday and holiday and ordinary Tuesday that her daughter deserved better than what life kept offering them. 60 seconds. Then she washed her face. Dried her eyes. Straightened her back. She went back to check on Meena one more time and stopped. Meena wasn't asleep anymore. She was sitting up in the dark. And she was looking at the birthday candle. What would you have done in that moment if you were Priya? Could you have held yourself together? Or would you have fallen apart completely? There are moments in life so quiet, so fragile, that the whole universe seems to hold its breath. This was one of them. It was 3 a.m. The entire mansion was submerged in the specific thick silence that only exists in the very deepest part of the night, when even the house seems to be asleep, when the only sounds are the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the east corridor and the distant hum of the security system running its automated checks. Alex Hales was not asleep. He rarely slept before 4 a.m. His brain didn't allow it. Even after 15-hour workdays, even after the kind of exhaustion that should have flattened him, his mind kept running. Numbers, projections, strategies, contingencies. Thoughts stacked on top of thoughts like skyscrapers that never stopped being built. He had given up fighting it years ago. His routine was always the same. Sometime around 3 a.m., When his eyes burned too much to look at another screen, he would walk. Just through the house. Through the long, quiet corridors. Past the rooms that were always spotless and always empty. Sometimes down to the kitchen for water. Sometimes just to move, to let his body do something while his brain refused to rest. He was on his second lap of the ground floor when he heard it. He stopped walking. He stood completely still in the middle of the corridor, 20 feet from the service wing hallway. The sound was so small, so thin, like a thread of sound rather than a full sound. It was a child crying. Not the loud, demanding cry of a child who wants attention. Not even the frightened cry of a child who has woken from a nightmare. This was something else. This was the cry of someone trying very hard not to cry. Quiet. Pitching. Barely there. Alex stood in the corridor for a long moment. Walk away, said the part of him that had been walking away from things for years. It's not your business. The mother will handle it. That is not your concern. He stood there. The crying continued. Soft, muffled, heartbreaking in its smallness. His feet moved before his brain gave them permission. The service wing hallway was narrow and dim. A single low-wattage light strip along the baseboard, enough to navigate without being disorienting. Alex moved down it slowly, quietly, and stopped when he reached the slightly open door at the end. He looked through the gap. The room was dark except for one tiny dancing point of light. A birthday candle, lit now, trembling in the still air, planted in the center of a small chocolate cake on a low table. And in front of it, sitting cross-legged on the thin carpet in her pajamas, the little girl, Mina. She was so small. He had never actually looked at her before. Not really. He'd been aware of a small presence moving around the periphery of his household, a blur of curls and chubby legs and a stuffed elephant. But he had never looked. She was tiny, 3 years old. Her pajamas had little stars on them. Her feet were bare. Her wild dark curls were loose around her face, and her cheeks were wet. She'd been crying, clearly, was still crying a little, in that silent way that suggested she had been crying for a while and had tired herself out. She was staring at the candle. She had one tiny hand cupped around the flame to protect it from any draft. Alex leaned very slightly closer to the door gap, barely breathing. The little girl closed her eyes. Her forehead creased with the effort of wishing. The concentration on her face was absolute, the way only a 3-year-old can wish, with their whole body, their whole soul, like wishing is the most serious business in the world. And then her lips moved. For words. Whispered so softly that Alex had to strain to catch them. For words that he heard perfectly, every syllable, in the complete silence of 3 a.m. Please don't take Mama. The world stopped. Alex's hand, which had been resting flat against the corridor wall, pressed harder. Without him meaning it to. Please don't take Mama. Not, I want toys. Not, I want a puppy. Not any of the 1,000 things a 3-year-old might have wished for on her birthday. Please don't take Mama. He stayed at that door for a moment that felt like it lasted a year. Then Mina opened her eyes, leaned forward, and blew out the candle. The room went dark. And in the darkness, in a tiny voice that was trying so hard to be brave, she said, "Happy birthday to me." And then she lay down right there on the carpet, not even back in bed, curled around her stuffed elephant and closed her eyes. Alex Hales stood in the corridor outside that door. And something that he had not felt in a very long time, something he had spent years building walls against, something he had convinced himself no longer existed inside him, broke open. Have you ever heard something, one small thing, that completely undid you? That cut through every wall you'd built and reached something you thought was gone? Because that is exactly what those 4 words did to Alex Hales that night. And what Alex didn't know yet, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the reason Mina had made that wish had nothing to do with ordinary 3-year-old fears. It had everything to do with something Priya had been hiding. Something that was about to change everything. Sometimes the people carrying the heaviest weights are the ones who smile the most carefully. Alex didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, the big leather chair behind his desk, the one where he had signed billion-dollar contracts and made decisions that affected thousands of people. And he sat in it like a man who had forgotten who he was. 4 words. Please don't take Mama. By 6 a.m., he had made a decision. He called his head of household management, a brisk, efficient woman named Mrs. Fernandez who had run his domestic staff for 4 years, and he asked her with careful casualness about the new housekeeper. Priya. Her file. Her situation. Mrs. Fernandez paused for just a half-second, the pause of someone deciding how much to say. Then she said, Mr. Hales, there are a few things in her file that I think perhaps you should read yourself. The file arrived on his desk at 6:30 a.m. Alex opened it, and as he read, the cold, controlled expression he always wore in his professional life quietly fell apart. Priya had been a pharmacist, not a housekeeper, a pharmacist trained and licensed, with a degree that had taken her 5 years and her family's entire savings to complete. She had worked at a city hospital for 2 years, building a career, a life. She had married young, a man her family had adored, a man she had believed in completely. When Mina was 8 months old, her husband had left. No explanation, no warning, no child support, no contact. Just gone. Priya had held on. She'd gone back to work. She'd found childcare. She'd managed. Then the hospital had downsized its pharmacy department. She'd lost her job. Then her apartment. Then her childcare. The sequence of losses had been so fast, so relentless, each one knocking out the support she needed to survive the next, that within 8 months she had gone from a licensed pharmacist with a career to a woman sleeping on her sister's couch with a 2-year-old and a stuffed elephant. She had applied for pharmaceutical positions. Dozens of them. But here was the part that made Alex's jaw tighten. 6 months ago, Priya had been diagnosed. The word in the file was clinical, precise, cold the way medical language always is. Lymphoma. Early stage. Treatable. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic. With the right treatment, the right medication, the right monitoring, she had very good prospects. The treatment was expensive. Not impossible. Not astronomical. But on a housekeeper's salary, saving enough while also keeping Mina fed and housed and healthy. The numbers didn't work. She had been quietly managing her condition with the most basic interventions she could afford, delaying the full treatment, telling herself she would figure it out, staying functional, staying present, staying mama. And every single day she was spending her energy not on getting better but on making sure Mina never knew that anything was wrong. Please don't take Mama. Mina knew. The way children always know. Not in facts, not in diagnosis, but in their cells, in the trembling antenna of their love. She knew something was wrong with her mother. She didn't have the words for it. She didn't have the understanding for it. But she had a birthday candle. And she had a wish. Alex sat at his desk for a very long time. He thought about his own mother, a woman he rarely allowed himself to think about. A woman who had worked 3 jobs to keep him in school. A woman who had died when he was 22, just 6 months before his company took off. Just 6 months before he could have given her everything she'd sacrificed for. He thought about how she used to look at him. Like he was the whole world. Exactly the way Priya looked at Mina. He pressed his fingers to his eyes. Then he pressed the intercom button on his desk. Mrs. Fernandez. Yes, Mr. Hales. I need you to arrange something for me. Quietly. And I need it done today. There was a pause. Of course, sir. What do you need? Alex looked at the file on his desk. At Priya's photograph. Professional, calm, careful. The face of a woman who had decided that falling apart was not something she could afford. I need the best oncologist in the country, he said. And I need them available by Friday. Silence on the line. Then very quietly Mrs. Fernandez said, Yes, Mr. Hales. But here is where the story twists. Because while Alex was making that phone call, while he was putting into motion something that he thought was a private decision, a quiet act of care that Priya would never need to know he had arranged. On the other side of the mansion, Priya had just found something slipped under her door. An envelope. Inside it a single sheet of paper. And on that paper, in handwriting she didn't recognize. I know you need help. I know you won't ask for it. But your daughter made a wish last night. And I intend to make sure it comes true. No signature. Priya read it 3 times. Then she sat down on the edge of her bed, very slowly, and Meena climbed up next to her and put a small warm hand on her knee and said, Mama, are you okay? And Priya, for the first time in months, let herself cry. Yes, baby, she whispered. I think maybe we are. What would you do if someone, a stranger, someone you'd never even had a proper conversation with, quietly moved mountains to help you? Could you accept that kind of grace? Or would your pride get in the way? Armor is only useful until the moment you realize the battle you've been fighting was always inside yourself. Priya did not know it was Alex. Not yet. She suspected, how could she not? Who else in that house had the resources, the access to her private file, the ability to arrange a consultation with a world-class specialist in 48 hours? But suspecting and knowing are very different things. And Priya was a woman who had learned not to assume gifts belonged to her. She went about her work that day with a careful, quiet stillness, the kind that comes not from peace but from a decision to wait and see. To not shatter the fragile, impossible thing that seemed to be happening by looking at it too hard. Alex, for his part, behaved exactly as he always did. He walked past her in the corridor at 8 a.m. without acknowledging her. He ate his breakfast alone. He took his morning call with his London office. He reviewed 3 contracts and dismissed 2 of them. He was cold, precise, untouchable, the billionaire in his machine. At 10:15 a.m. He happened to walk through the kitchen on his way to his study. Meena was sitting at the small staff table in the corner, coloring. She had the elephant coloring book open. She had all 4 of her chunky crayons lined up in front of her in careful order. Purple, blue, red, yellow. And she was working on a particularly complicated elephant with the focused intensity of a senior surgeon. Alex stopped in the kitchen doorway. Meena looked up. And unlike every adult in that house, who always looked at Alex with some combination of deference and nerves and carefully masked discomfort, Meena just looked at him. Curious. Entirely unimpressed. You're very tall, she observed. Something moved across Alex's face. Gone before it could be named. Yes, he said. Meena considered this information. My motu is very small, she offered, holding up the stuffed elephant, apparently by way of contrast. Alex looked at the elephant. The elephant, worn, one eye slightly loose, bow around its neck fraying, looked back at him. He seems. Alex searched for the word. Important. Meena nodded with great gravity. He is my best friend, she confirmed. And also Mama's. When Mama is sad, Motu sits with her. Alex was quiet for a moment. Does your Mama get sad often? Meena tilted her head. The way children do when they're deciding whether to tell a truth that they feel is very large. Sometimes, she said carefully. But she doesn't tell me. She thinks I don't know. She looked back at her coloring book. But I know. The silence in the kitchen was complete. Mina. Alex said her name for the first time. It felt strange in his mouth. Not bad strange. Just unfamiliar. Like a word in a language you've always known exists but never tried to speak. Did you have a good birthday? Mina's crayon paused. She looked up at him again. The large dark eyes. The absolute unguarded honesty. I made a wish, she said. I know, Alex said, and then stopped. Recalibrated. I mean, did it feel like a good wish? Mina nodded, slow and certain. It was a very important wish. She tapped Motu on the head thoughtfully. Motu says important wishes take time. But I think it's already working. Alex looked at this 3-year-old girl. This 3-year-old girl who had sat alone in the dark at 3 a.m. with a birthday candle, wearing her star pajamas, and wished for her mother's life. I think it might be, he said. He left the kitchen. And in the hallway outside, he stood very still for a moment, one hand flat against the wall, head slightly bowed. Because here is what Alex Hales had never told anyone. Not his business partners. Not his few acquaintances who approximated friends. Not the rare interviewer who tried to pry into his personal life. When he was 9 years old, his mother had been sick. Not the same illness. Not the same circumstances. But the same terrible geography. A parent who was quietly falling apart while trying to hold their child's world steady. A parent who smiled through the pain and made the birthday cake and tucked the child in and said, "Everything is fine, sweetheart," while carrying something unspeakable alone. He had been 9. He hadn't known the words. He hadn't understood the diagnosis. But he had known, in the wordless, cellular way that children always know. He had known something was wrong with his mama. And he had been powerless. For 21 years, ever since his mother had gotten better. For 21 years he had carried that powerlessness like a stone in his chest. He had built the empire, made the money, developed the capability to fix things on a scale most people couldn't imagine. And he had never found a way to use any of it to fix the right things. Till now. Until a 3-year-old girl with 4 chunky crayons and a stuffed elephant named Motu had looked at him with absolutely zero fear and reminded him why power was only worth anything if you aimed it at the right things. The appointment was set for Friday. On Thursday evening, Mrs. Fernandez quietly informed Priya that she had been granted a full day off tomorrow, with transportation provided, and that the nature of the appointment and all associated medical costs had been arranged by the estate. Priya stood in Mrs. Fernandez's office and tried very hard to maintain her composure. "Who arranged this?" she asked. Mrs. Fernandez, a woman not given to sentimentality, allowed herself a small, private smile. "Someone who heard something important," she said, and decided to listen. Have you ever experienced a moment when you realized that someone had been paying attention to your pain, even when you thought nobody saw? Because there is almost nothing more overwhelming than being truly seen. And now, here comes the part of the story that nobody expected. Not Alex. Not Priya. Not even Mina. It was a Saturday morning, 10 days after the appointment. The oncologist's report had come back. The treatment plan was in place. The prognosis, with full proper treatment, the kind that was now fully funded, managed, arranged, was genuinely excellent. The doctor had used the word remission, with a confidence that Priya had been afraid to believe but was learning, slowly, to let herself hold. She was going to be okay. She was going to be here. Mina's wish was working. On this Saturday morning, Priya had woken early, gone to the estate's kitchen, and spent 2 hours doing something she had never done before in her time at this house. She cooked for someone other than herself and Mina. She made breakfast. A proper one. Parathas, the way her mother had made them, with a filling of spiced potato and a bowl of yogurt and fresh chutney made from the herbs she'd noticed growing unattended in the corner of the estate's garden. She made chai, the real kind with cardamom and ginger and the proportion of milk that takes years to get exactly right. She made enough for 2 adults and a small child. She set the small staff table. And then she went to find Alex. He was in his study, already at his desk, already staring at his screens at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday. Priya knocked on the open door. He looked up. There was a long moment between them. The first real one, the first moment of direct, unguarded looking, since she had come to work in this house. "Mr. Hales," she said. "I made breakfast. I would like it very much if you would come and eat." Alex looked at her. "That's not," he started. "I know it's not in my job description," Priya said quietly. "I know you prefer to eat alone. I know you have about 15 things on your schedule before noon. Beep. Please come and eat." Alex was silent. Then he pushed back his chair. He came. Meena was already at the table when they arrived, sitting with Motu propped against the salt shaker, both of them apparently waiting with great patience. When she saw Alex come through the door behind her mother, her face lit with the absolute, uncomplicated joy of a child who has decided someone is good and is simply happy to see them. "You came," she announced like she had been expecting him. "I came," Alex agreed. He sat down at the table, which he had never done in 4 years of owning this house, and looked at the food in front of him. He picked up the parathas. Yep. Nobody spoke for a while. It was Meena who broke the silence, in the way that Meena always broke silences, with complete, weaponized honesty. "My wish worked," she told Alex very seriously, through a mouthful of paratha. Alex looked at her. "Did it?" Meena nodded. "Mama is going to be okay," the doctor said. Mama cried when he said it. Happy cried. That means the wish worked. Alex's throat moved. "Meena," Priya started softly. "I made the wish for Mama," Meena continued, apparently not done with her announcement. "Because you're not supposed to make wishes for yourself. Motu told me." She consulted Motu briefly. "Motu says thank you." Alex looked at the stuffed elephant. Then he looked at Meena. "Will you thank Motu for me," he said carefully, "for the advice about wishes?" Meena whispered something to Motu. "Listen." Looked back at Alex. "Motu says you already knew," she informed him. "About the wishes. You just forgot." The kitchen was very quiet. Priya was looking at her daughter with the expression of a woman who had been utterly, completely defeated by love. And Alex Hales, billionaire empire builder, the man who had not sat at a table like this in years, the man who had eaten 1,000 expensive dinners alone in 60 rooms, sat at a small staff table with a paratha in his hand and a 3-year-old stuffed elephant apparently commenting on his psychology. And he laughed. Real one. Surprised out of him. The sound of it filled the kitchen like something that had been locked in a room for a very long time and had finally found the door open. Meena beamed. Priya looked at him, really looked, and her eyes were bright. And this is where the final, most powerful truth of this story reveals itself. Because what nobody knew, not Mrs. Fernandez, not the staff, not even Priya, was what Alex had done 3 days earlier. He had called his company's board of directors. He had told them that Hales Global was establishing a foundation, a healthcare fund specifically targeted at single-parent families facing medical crises, the exact intersection of catastrophes that fall through every existing safety net, the ones who make too much for emergency aid but too little to afford care. The ones who keep going to work and keep smiling and never ask for help. He had funded it with $20 million of his own money. He had named it, quietly, without announcement, without a press release, the Meena Foundation. Priya found out when Mrs. Fernandez, with unusual emotion in her professional voice, read her the name from the official filing documents 2 weeks later. She had to sit down. "Why?" she managed. Mrs. Fernandez handed her a small handwritten note. It said, "Because she reminded me that the best wishes aren't for ourselves. And because some things are worth more than any amount I have ever put my name on." There was no signature, but Priya knew. And that evening, when she told Meena that a very important thing had been named after her, Meena thought about it very seriously, and then said, "Is it a good thing?" "It's a very good thing," Priya said. "It's going to help a lot of mamas." Meena absorbed this. Then she held Motu up. "Motu wants to know," she said, "if the tall man will come to breakfast again tomorrow." Priya smiled, the full, unguarded, healed kind of smile that had been gone for too long. "I think," she said softly, "he just might." Here is what this story leaves me with every single time. There are people all around us, in our office buildings, in our apartment blocks, in the houses where they quietly clean and cook and maintain the lives of others, who are carrying things we cannot see, who smile when you walk past, who say, "I'm fine," because asking for help feels like too great a risk. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment of truly listening, one moment of paying attention to a sound in the dark, one moment of choosing to stay instead of walking away. Alex didn't save Priya through grand gestures or dramatic declarations. He saved her the way the most meaningful things in life happen, quietly, through a door left slightly open, through a child's wish that reminded him of his own. The question I want to leave with you today is this. Who in your life right now might be whispering a wish in the dark, and hoping more than anything that someone is listening? If this story moved you, even a little, please hit that like button right now. Costs you nothing and it means everything. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment in this story that hit you hardest? Was it the birthday candle? The 4 words? The breakfast table? I genuinely want to know. If you're not subscribed yet, this is your sign. We tell stories like this every single week. Stories about real human love, sacrifice, and the moments that change everything. You don't want to miss them. And before you go, there is another story waiting for you right now on this channel that is just as powerful as this one. Click it. I promise you won't regret it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Because listening, as Alex Hales learned at 3 a.m. on a night he'll never forget, is where everything begins.